How much the economic sanctions will affect Russia in the long term. What economic sanctions mean for Russia and the world, explained by an expert. The United States and Europe have avoided direct military conflict with Russia amid its invasion of Ukraine. But they are using a powerful tool to try to push back against Russia and create consequences for its aggression. An unexpectedly fast and powerful set of financial sanctions meant to shock the country's economy and hamstring its access to financial resources. So, welcome to MoneyIQ. Before we continue, please take a brief moment, go down and smash the like button. And if you have not subscribed to our channel yet, what are you waiting for? Please do it. In the span of just a few days, the global economic outlook has darkened while troops battled in Ukraine, and unexpectedly, potent financial sanctions rocked Russia's economy and threatened to further fuel worldwide inflation. The price of oil, natural gas, and other staples spiked on Monday. At the same time, the groaning weight on supply chains still laboring from the pandemic rose as the United States, Europe, and their allies tightened the screws on Russia's financial transactions and froze hundreds of billions of dollars of the central bank's assets that are held abroad. Russia has long been a relatively minor player in the global economy, accounting for just 1.7% of the world's total output despite its enormous energy exports. President Vladimir V. Putin has moved to further insulate it in recent years, building up a storehouse of foreign exchange reserves, reducing national debt, and even banning cheese and other food imports from Europe. While Russia may have anticipated the measures, what the country perhaps did not anticipate was for so much action to be taken so swiftly. The US and European allies have limited its ability to transact in foreign currencies such as dollars and euros, frozen the assets of multiple Russian banks, and cut off Russians' banks from the SWIFT messaging system banks use to transmit information globally. Japan said it would join in freezing the assets of Russian leaders and some banks, and freezing Russia's foreign reserves in yen. Even Switzerland, a historically neutral country in conflict, has agreed to join sanctions efforts. In turn, Russia has taken action to try to shore up its economy and finances. Its central bank has doubled its interest rate in an attempt to stabilize the ruble after the currency sank against the dollar. The country, which has been facing sanctions since its invasion of Crimea in 2014, has over $600 billion in foreign reserves, meaning money in other countries, currencies, and gold. It built up those reserves specifically to help fend off sanctions. As the New York Times notes, a lot of that money isn't actually in Russia, but is essentially on paper in banks around the world. So now, the country could have a hard time accessing that money. Sanctions are likely to hurt the Russian government. They are also hurting the Russian people who were already in a tough spot before now. Russia has long been a relatively minor player in the global economy, accounting for just 1.7% of the world's total output despite its enormous energy exports. President Vladimir V. Putin has moved to further insulate it in recent years, building up a storehouse of foreign exchange reserves, reducing national debt, and even banning cheese and other food imports from Europe. But while Mr. Putin has ignored a slate of international norms, he cannot ignore a modern and mammoth financial system that is largely controlled by governments and bankers outside his country. He has mobilized tens of thousands of his troops, and in response, allied governments have mobilized their vast financial power. Now, it's a gamble between a financial clock and a military clock to vaporize the resources to conduct a war, said Julia Friedlander, director of the Economic Statecraft Initiative at the Atlantic Council. Together, the invasion and the sanctions inject a huge dose of uncertainty and volatility into economic decision-making, heightening the risk to the global outlook. Can you talk about the breadth of the international sanctions on Russia right now? How big of a deal is this? This is a unique combination of measures that have been taken. Each individual measure is not unprecedented. What is historically unprecedented is the degree of multilateral coordination and the fact that they're using these nuclear options at the same time. It definitely will have a dramatic impact on the Russian economy. But at the same time, there's room for further escalation. What does this mean for Russia's economy? We are looking at a double-digit economic contraction already. We have seen extreme measures applied by the Russian government in terms of capital controls and blocking transfers of foreign currency to non-residents. Exporters have to convert 80% of their proceeds to the domestic market, and Russia's central bank has more than doubled interest rates. Russia is also undertaking banking sector support, releasing some capital for the banks. All these measures are just basic crisis management, but this crisis will grow larger for the Russian economy and common Russian people than whatever we can forecast or expect at the moment. What's going on with the ruble? There's definitely been movement on the ruble. Markets closed last week, and there have also been changes this week. The rate hike had an effect. The central bank more than doubled interest rates from 9.5 to 20%, and capital controls should also help. Here, it is critical to see what individual and corporate depositors will do, whether they will accelerate dollarization of deposits, meaning they generate a big demand for dollars. If you have a 10 percentage point increase in the dollarization of domestic deposits, and we have seen that in the past, in the 2008 crisis, then you have pressure to have $100 billion unreserved, and they do not have that. In the extreme, if these rate hikes do not work, capital controls do not work, you could see the risk of foreign exchange deposits being frozen by the Russian government. So basically, Russia is trying to get people to keep their money in rubles instead of putting it in dollars? Right. For basic domestic Russian economic participants, what they're trying to do is to prevent them from converting their rubles into dollars and to stop them from withdrawing cash from the banking system. For non-residents, they have effectively put up the Iron Curtain. You're no longer able to pay as a resident in foreign currencies to a non-resident. Do you think the sanctions are more than the Russian government expected? It's very hard to speculate what the Russian authorities thought would happen. Given the current environment, I think it was to be expected that these nuclear measures would be put forward. Global authorities flagged that if there was an escalation in Ukraine, they were preparing factors that included extremely severe measures, and that's what the authorities multilaterally are delivering. There's room for escalations on sanctions, right? What does that look like? Tightening existing sanctions first and foremost, going after the central bank's ability to get foreign exchange, for example, or to transact in foreign exchange that could be further curtailed. The same goes for banks. Not all banks have lost access to US dollars. They haven't yet lost access to euros. Not all banks have lost access to SWIFT, a messaging system banks use to transmit information such as payment confirmations and currency exchanges worldwide. Even with the existing framework, there are ways to tighten the measures taken over the weekend. There's also energy and commodity prices. There's a possibility of limiting those as well. Is there coming back from this? In the current set of sanctions packages, there is room for de-escalation should the authorities believe that it's warranted. We now have different options on the table. Assessing these options is not my role as an economist, but there are options to scale up and scale down sanctions. Also, we should not forget that economic sanctions are part of the broader economic statecraft, and that is part of the broader set of foreign policy tools, international relations, defense, and military tools. This is just one of the tools being applied within the broader framework, but within that tool, there is room for escalation. And in the meantime, this is hurting everyone in Russia, right? Or are the wealthy spared? No matter how much money you have, you cannot transfer it abroad, you cannot get it out of your bank, and there's nowhere to invest. But still, with any crisis, the common people feel it the most. Even if the sanctions are specifically targeted, there are severe ramifications for the general populace. For instance, United Nations sanctions on Iraq doubled infant and under 5 mortality rates. Similarly, sanctions can also have major implications for food security. US sanctions against Cuba contributed to a decline in the availability of nutritious foods and increased infectious diseases and deaths for the adult and elderly population. More recent evidence suggests that imposing sanctions slows economic growth and development, widens the poverty gap, restricts access to food and medicines, and exacerbates inequalities. Already, we're watching ordinary Russians bearing the brunt of the ongoing economic sanctions as the ruble has lost 40% of its value and interest rates increased to 20%. Further isolating Russia and Putin from the international community also gives the Russian autocratic regime yet another opportunity to impose more repressive policies on its citizens and opposition parties. As the world rightfully fears for the Ukrainian people, we must not turn a blind eye to Russians who are also Putin's victims. The latest sanctions, as Biden has stated, could run into blowback in the US this time as well. Only hours after the invasion, the stock markets plunged early Thursday and oil prices rocketed up. There's some belief that inflation will also be pushed up, Kawada said. So guys, that is all for today. Did we miss some important principles? Please let us know in the comments. Do share this video with your friends. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more informative videos. See you next time.